Hi, my name is Ryan Jacobs, and a couple weeks ago I was invited to give a lecture to the Palo Alto Camera Club on my photography. And I actually released a pre-recorded version of this lecture a while back, but I recently got access to the full recorded lecture. And so I wanted to just post that here on YouTube, share that with you guys, to give you an introduction to my work. I talk about my ongoing photography project, Dream Portal, in addition to some of my other photography. And I'll also talk a little bit about my inspirations in this talk. And I thought it might be nice just to show you that I'm an active photographer. I think there's a lot of content out there that's created by marketers or, camera companies. But it's nice to, I think, see some of the work every once in a while. So anyway, I hope you enjoy this lecture. And if you do, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. All right, here we go. My name is Ryan Jacobs, and I want to talk about this series Dream Portal that I've been working on. And before we get into the photography stuff, I think I want to give you all a little bit of backstory. So long ago, I was an undergraduate here at UC San Diego, and I actually studied music composition. So my senior year, I took one-on-one composition lessons, and the first piece I wrote that quarter was a piano piece, pretty standard 18th century counterpoint kind of stuff. And I was proud of it, so I brought it into my teacher. This guy, Chinnery Ung, really nice guy, Cambodian composer, and he did not think it was so great. and he was right. And the way he told me this was he handed it back to me and he said, "I think you need to dream more." And in retrospect, I didn't know at first what he was talking about, but it was exactly the right advice. And so I spent all quarter thinking about what that meant. And at the end of the quarter, I wrote this piece called Marimbinator. The impetus for which was, what if a giant killer marimba just took over the concert hall? And so I had two players with bass bows bowing the sides of the bars of the marimba, making this bell tone. And I ran that through an Ibanez tube screamer, which is a guitar distortion pedal. So it just made this giant fuzzy sound all around the concert hall. And this was the score to the piece. And it was a success. I was happy with the piece. He was happy with the piece. But it was all from that advice to, be more imaginative and dream of the possibilities of music. So one other experience I had in UCSD music, I heard a piece by this guy, composer Tom Johnson. And it was a piece called Failing, for a bass player who's there playing the bass and giving a speech at the same time. And the speech is all about how the music and the speech will get progressively harder and harder until inevitably the performer will fail at doing both at the same time. But they're going to try their hardest, but they're still going to fail. And so it's this really provocative piece that, explores what art really is. Is it the perfection that you achieve at the end? And according to Tom Johnson, no, it's the striving for perfection, but ultimately the failure along the way and, just all that process. Okay, so fast forward to now, I'm a student here at De Anza Community College. You all know De Anza. Much less impressive architecture, but still a nice place. And I'm taking photography classes here. So my first project that I did at De Anza, photography project, was called the Mixed Race Project. I myself am mixed race, and I took photographs of mixed race residents of the Bay Area, and I had interviews that I did with them about the experience that they've had, with that identity. And so, I did a lot of my Photoshop retouching, a lot of localized dodge and burn and all that, typical headshot stuff. And then over time at De Anza, I started taking film classes. So I got myself a medium format in MiRZ, I got a large format Intrepid, and I learned to develop black and white film and make prints in the wet darkroom. And so my portraiture changed quite a bit. I started taking a lot of photos of students around De Anza. I was interested in that community. And lots of black background or white background, very simple straight-on portraits, no retouching at all. Just trying to really get the best film photographs that I possibly could. So eventually, that gets boring if you do it for too long. And so we started going outside and playing with the same setup, but putting prisms in front of the lens between the camera and the subject. And the nice thing about community college is you always have people that are willing to help you out. So these are just students being photo assistants and trying to make something cool. And at first, I thought they actually weren't that successful. I got a result like this. But this was the first one where I looked at the negative and I realized up in the upper left-hand corner there was something very cool. The prism had distorted her face
to the point where it was like in this liminal space between total reality and total abstraction. And so to me, it looked like a face out of a dream, right? Like something you would see in a dream, a very fleeting moment. And so I cropped in, and this was the result. And at the same time, this is the idea of dreaming more as a photographer, right? What could be? What are the possibilities beyond just straight portraiture? And so I started trying to expand on this idea. And eventually, I decided 4x5 film was not expensive enough, so I got an 8x10 camera. And you can see that here. We're in the studio this time with the light. And Maddie is on the left holding a prism. She's going to put that in front of the camera very soon. And the nice thing about 8x10 film is you can start to make contact prints from it. And so on the right is a scan of a print that I made that's actually a platinum print, where you brush the emulsion onto the paper and then you make a contact print directly from the negative. So this opens up a lot more possibilities for dreaming about what photography can be. So as you might imagine, I've collected a lot of prisms over the years doing this work. On the top are some prisms that are sort of made for photography, although I tend to use them not as intended. So the ones that screw onto the lens, I never use them on the lens. I always take them off and just freehand it. And then there are some objets d'art that I've collected from Crate and Barrel or wherever, and I use those like in this picture here. And this one's actually taken on a medium format camera. The interesting thing about medium format is that you can't crop in as tightly, so you have to use more of the negative, which means I end up with more failures. Even though it does help that you can see what you're doing a little bit. But yeah, I get a lot of failed attempts. And where the face is either too in focus or it's just completely blown out or there's a bad composition or something. But to me, what's interesting is that's kind of where the art lies. You have to experience these failures because what that also means is that the ones that are successful are ones that I never would have expected. Here are some failed attempts on 4x5. You can see on the left, it looks too clean. And then there's not one single face that I can zoom in on. All the distorted faces kind of overlap, all sorts of reasons why things might fail. The one on the right is not a great composition. But then every once in a while, you get one like this. And this, I think, is maybe the best example I can show you to explain this project, because on the right half of the image, I cannot for the life of me figure out what it was until I realized this had never happened before. It's the umbrella reflecting off one facet of the prism. So this is a studio umbrella. And so those are the successes. And to me, that's what Dream Portal is about. It's about dreaming about what the possibilities can be and then finding success that you don't expect. So that's the backstory to the project. Second piece I'll talk a little bit about is the sort of the technical stuff and the aspect of printmaking, since I do a lot of work with film. And I will show you just two that I've brought. This one, you'll see a little reflection. Sorry about that. These are framed, but this is one of the platinum prints I did. You can see the brush strokes. And then I know some of you have seen these, but this is a big old 16 by 20. I can't even fit it on the screen, but I think you get the idea. And that one is a silver gelatin print. And I showed a series of those last year, actually, at the Community School of Music and Arts show. So the way I go about making a print, it's pretty much a 5-day process. Day 0, I'll call it, I have to load some film. And then day 1 is I go out and shoot. So I capture the image. This one's a landscape, but I can do the same thing with people. Then day 2 is developing the film. So if it's been a while since you all have done this, this is an 8x10 tank. This is what it looks like. So you stick one sheet in there. And something to keep in mind is I can develop one sheet of 8x10 film at a time or 4 sheets of 4x5 film, and that takes about half an hour. And so for one shoot, I'm usually committing to like 2 or 3 hours of just developing the film, sometimes to not get anything at all in the way of results. So then you make the print, and this is where I decide, do I want to do a silver gelatin in the darkroom with some dodging and burning, or do I want to do a platinum print, in which case I have to brush on the emulsion and then expose it under a UV light. Day 4, I don't have to do this with platinum prints, but with silver gelatin prints, I like to selenium tone them, especially if I'm going to show the work. And so selenium toning kind of ups the contrast, makes it a little more archival, makes it a nicer print. And then finally, matting and framing. And by the way, a little tip, De Anza has one of these speed mats, which is maybe my favorite machine ever. It cuts way down on the amount of time it takes you to cut a mat, and it saves you a trip to Michael's. So that's the technical side of things. And then I wanted to share with you a few other projects as well that I've been working on. One is I continued to do straight portraits along with the prisms, partly because sometimes I didn't get a prism portrait that worked. So I wanted to make sure to at least reward people for their time. You know, people are doing me favors by coming in to model for me. So if I didn't have a prism portrait that worked, I would just give them a straight portrait and they'd be usually pretty happy with that. So I collected those into a little zine that I made. Here are some of the photos you can see there. And then part of the zine was also a series I've been doing just going around De Anza Community College. I'm lucky enough to be in the arts quad. So along with the photo building, there's a ceramics building right there. There's also a sculpture building, and there's also a wood shop. And this is one of the photos I took of the ceramics suit there. Kind of a fun one. I've also been taking just, some little one-off portrait studio work. This is actually a friend of mine who came in the studio. She went to gun high school with me a long time ago. And this was her maternity photo. And I want to tell a quick little story about this one too, just so you guys get a sense of film photography. She actually called me asking to do the maternity photos. And I said, sure. Let's get on the phone. Let's talk a little bit about what you're going to wear. Let's talk about how you're going to do your hair, etc. And as we were talking, she said, wait a second. I thought this was the sort of thing where I go into the studio and you take a million photos and the light flashes and then we look at them on the computer. And so I had to explain to her, no. I have an 8x10 camera. We're going to take exactly 7 photos because that is the amount of film that I have left. And we ended up taking 5. But what's interesting about that is she really committed. And I think that's one thing to remember about film photography. I think a lot of people don't think about this. When somebody is in front of a big old Intrepid, like a 4x5 or an 8x10, or even sometimes the medium format film cameras, there's a real sense of seriousness where people say, oh, I have to up my game as well. And you get a lot more buy-in for making a good picture. So anyway. I've also been doing a little bit of color work recently, like this one of Dolores Park and this one of the Duke of Edinburgh pub. This is a bit of a personal project for me because this was the site of the after party for my wedding, for my wife and I. But one cool thing about this that you guys might be interested in as well, there is now a place in San Francisco that you can print color photos in the analog darkroom. So it's called Photo Laundry. And if you have any old color negatives, you can go up there and learn how to print. So I've been making some prints, and I'll show you. I have one of those as well. Stop share for a sec. And there you go. So that's the Duke of Edinburgh. And then finally, the last thing I want to share with you is just a few places I've been getting some inspiration recently. Starting with this one, kind of an unexpected place. But I would imagine, if you don't know Aerie, by the way, Aerie is a brand. It's the underwear branch of American Eagle Outfitters. So American Eagle, the store in the mall where all the kids go to shop, that's Aerie as well. And what probably I assume immediately jumps out at you, since you all are photographers, is that these photos are completely unretouched at all. And yet they are campaign photos for the Aerie brand. They appeared on the website, they appeared in the catalog. And Aerie has been doing this since 2014. And this is not to say, to take a stance on retouching. It happens all over the place. I'm a retoucher myself. But what I actually am inspired by here is that Aerie is the brand that I would least expect to do this because they're a very typical mall brand. And I'm sure the creative director whose idea this was got tons of pushback and everybody told him or her that it was a terrible idea. And yet they've been doing it for the last 10 years. And they're now a $3 billion brand. To the point where this year they started doing it for their men's line too, completely unretouched photos. This to me is like dreaming of what photography can be, right? I think a lot of the art lies kind of on the border of, oh, it's been done this way for years and years and years, and now we're going to do something different. And by the way, this is a great photo too. I mean, they put him up against the side of the door, like the lighting is perfect, but it's a real body. So that's one. Another source of inspiration, this one's going to be a little more obvious why it's inspirational, I think, but a photographer named Winston Duke, a relatively unknown guy, I think, from the UK, but he does these amazing portraits that I can never quite figure out. I've tried, but I know he works with film, black and white film. But I think there's a lot of projectors being used. I think there's a lot of creative light sources, like in the photo up top. And then in the photo on the right, I think there's some negative manipulation going on as well. It looks like half of the negative has been dunked in a liquid. So the left side has gotten distorted somehow. But as I'm thinking more and more about not just prisms, but what else can I do to push the limits of photography? This is a big inspiration for me. And then one more, a little closer to home. Jan Sim is a lady up in San Francisco, actually, local photographer, and she does these beautiful emulsion lifts. So where she takes a Polaroid picture and then dunks it in hot water so the emulsion lifts off, and she'll move that onto a piece of paper and then play around with like wrinkling the paper a little bit or staining it. I know she hand paints on some of her work, and she makes these beautiful images, and they explore sort of the memories of childhood. And she says she wishes she had more of those memories and that they were clear. And so this is like her attempt to show what she sees her own childhood as and just childhood in general. So I just thought that was really beautiful work again on the subject of dreaming. So finally, I just wanted to share with everybody, if you want to see more of my work, I have a website, brianjacobsphoto.com. You can go to that. And then if you want to follow me on YouTube, I have a YouTube channel too. It's called Silver and Platinum. So go check it out. And yeah, thank you all so much for coming to this talk. It's not often that I get a chance to actually chat about photography with a group that is as knowledgeable as this. So yeah, that's it. And I'll take questions if you all want.